The cameras were rolling. Laughter echoed across the Family Feud set. Steve Harvey was in his elements, smiling, cracking jokes, making the crowd roar. It felt like any other celebrity special. Lights bright, audience hyped, and everything going exactly as planned. But then, something happened that no one expected. In the middle of all the fun, Steve stopped cold. He stared at his guest, completely silent. This wasn't one of his famous pauses before a punchline. This was different. What caused it wasn't a joke or a mistake. It was one man's honest, heartfelt words about Jesus. Jonathan Roumie had just walked onto the stage. Known to millions as the actor who plays Jesus in The Chosen. To the audience, he was a celebrity. To Steve, he was another guest for the day. But behind the scenes, something deeper was about to unfold. Steve thought he was hosting another light-hearted episode. But God had other plans. No one on set knew it yet, but they were about to witness a moment that would shake hearts, move souls, and reach millions far beyond that studio. As Jonathan spoke, something in the air shifted. The jokes faded. The room got quieter. Even the cameras felt like they were holding their breath. And across the country, phones started ringing. People calling friends, crying, saying, "You need to see this." Because when faith shows up without warning, it doesn't care if the cameras are rolling. It doesn't ask for permission. It just moves. And this moment unscripted, raw, and real would change lives. What happens when someone speaks so honestly about God that a whole room falls silent? Can a game show become a moment of worship? You're about to see what brought a comedian to tears and made millions rethink their relationship with Jesus. Backstage at the Family Feud studio, everything felt like it always did. Bright lights, makeup brushes buzzing, crew rushing from one corner to another. Steve Harvey was in his dressing room, running through notes and preparing his usual jokes. It was another celebrity special, nothing out of the ordinary. But when he finally met Jonathan Roumie, the actor known for playing Jesus in The Chosen, the mood began to shift. Steve extended his hand, expecting a casual chat. Jonathan smiled and returned the handshake, humble and soft-spoken. Steve complimented his role, said how much people were talking about it. But instead of soaking in the praise, Jonathan simply said, "It's not me, Steve. I'm just a vessel. Jesus is the one doing the work." That one sentence threw Steve off more than he let on. He laughed politely, but deep inside, something stirred. Steve was used to hosting, used to leading the room, setting the tone. But there was something about Jonathan's calmness that unsettled him. The actor didn't carry the energy of a celebrity. He carried something else. Something quieter, heavier, realer. And Steve, who had long built his public image on charisma and confidence, found himself strangely uncomfortable in that presence. The show began, as usual. The lights hit. The crowd cheered. The theme song blasted. "Let's play the feud," Steve shouted, bringing out his signature energy. The audience laughed, clapped, and the game started. But the vibe slowly started to shift. Jonathan answered questions with a pace that was noticeable. He wasn't trying to be funny or impressive. He didn't even seem to care about winning. His calm, steady presence stood in quiet contrast to the usual noise of the show. Crew members began whispering. The jokes felt lighter. The usual bounce in Steve's voice softened. He kept watching Jonathan, feeling something strange, like a quiet pull on his spirit. During a commercial break, Steve leaned in and asked, "How do you handle the pressure of playing Jesus?" Jonathan didn't hesitate. "I don't carry it alone," he said. "Before I walk on set, I pray that he speaks through me. It's not just acting, it's ministry." His voice was calm, but the words hit Steve hard. Suddenly, all the years of performance, all the shows, the laughs, the hustle, it felt shallow. Steve smiled outwardly, but inside he was flooded with doubt. Was I really living what I claimed to believe? Jonathan went on to share more. He spoke about being broke, about almost giving up on acting, about praying for direction when he had nothing left and then receiving the unexpected call to audition for the role of Jesus. It wasn't a lucky break. It was an answered prayer. Steve didn't know what to say. The cameras were back on, but his mind was still backstage. Then, in the middle of the show, it happened. Steve asked Jonathan another question, half searching. "Do you feel something special when you're playing that role?" Jonathan paused, looked Steve straight in the eye and said, "Yes. Sometimes I feel like I'm not the one speaking. It's like he's there with me. I'm never alone on that set." And Steve froze. Completely. No comeback. No joke. No smile. The audience went quiet. The crew looked around nervously. A producer whispered, "We're still rolling." But Steve didn't move. His eyes stayed locked on Jonathan. Inside, he was unraveling. Years of hosting, hundreds of episodes, but this was different. He wasn't in control. His usual rhythm was gone. The joy that he brought others suddenly felt like a mask. He didn't know why, but he wanted to cry. Steve had always believed in God. He prayed, he spoke about faith. But this was something deeper. Jonathan wasn't performing. He was living it. Right there, on a game show set. Steve's public role clashed with his private doubts. His spirit was being called out of hiding, not by force, not by pressure, but by the quiet weight of someone who believed so deeply that it changed the air around him. This wasn't about questions and answers anymore. This was about identity. Faith had just walked into the room wearing a simple smile and a quiet voice. And Stephen Live TV didn't know how to respond. Not because he didn't care, but because something real had touched a place in him he hadn't visited in a long time. And for the first time in his long career, Steve Harvey had nothing to say. The tension in the studio was thick, but not from nerves or awkwardness. It was something different, something holy. Steve Harvey stood in front of his podium, holding his mic, but for once he wasn't trying to be funny. He wasn't trying to fill the silence. He was feeling it, deeply. He looked at Jonathan, this quiet, humble actor, who had somehow turned a game show into something sacred, and asked a question that didn't feel scripted at all. "Do you ever feel like Jesus is really with you while filming?" Jonathan didn't answer right away. He took a breath. His voice shook slightly when he finally spoke. "Yes," he said. "Sometimes I feel like I'm not the one speaking at all. It's like he's right there, guiding me. It's not just acting. It's something more." The room went completely still. You could hear people breathing. The audience, once buzzing with laughter and excitement, sat frozen. A few hands quietly moved to wipe away tears. Even the crew, usually focused and distracted by their jobs, stopped to listen. And then it happened. Steve whispered, barely loud enough for the mic to catch it. "I feel him here right now." His voice cracked. He took off his glasses and wiped his eyes. The man known for being strong, sharp, and quick with his words stood completely undone. Jonathan didn't hesitate. He stepped forward and gently placed a hand on Steve's shoulder. That simple gesture said everything. "I pray before every show," Steve said, his voice raw. "But today, I think God answered back." No one in the room moved. The cameras kept rolling, but it didn't feel like a show anymore. Steve looked at Jonathan again and asked him something that shocked even the control room. "Would you lead us in prayer?" Jonathan nodded. No hesitation, no performance. He turned to the room, looked at the contestants, the crew, the audience, and simply said, "Let's pray." One by one, people bowed their heads. Crew members dropped their equipment and joined hands. Contestants stood shoulder to shoulder, forgetting the scoreboard. Audience members closed their eyes. Some cried silently. Some whispered prayers under their breath. Jonathan began, softly but clearly. "God, use this moment to remind every person here and every person watching that they are not forgotten, that you see them, that you love them, that even here, on a game show set, you can show up and speak to hearts." The camera moved slowly across the room. You could see tears on people's faces. Steve stood holding Jonathan's hand, head down, overwhelmed. One camera guy had to wipe his lens. It had fogged up from his own tears. And far beyond the studio, something was happening. Phones started ringing at the network. People calling in, saying they were crying in their living rooms. Viewers kneeling in front of TVs, hands raised. Pastors across the country texting each other. "Did you just see that?" Social media blew up. Videos of the moment started going viral within minutes. No one expected a revival to break out in the middle of Family Feud, but it did. Back in the studio, the moment kept building. It didn't feel like television anymore. It felt like church. Not the kind with big lights and loud music, but the kind that sneaks up on you when you need it most. The kind where God whispers, "I'm right here." One lighting tech, known for always keeping to himself, muttered, "I don't know why I'm crying." A stagehand who hadn't been to church in 10 years was quietly whispering a prayer. Even the skeptic producer in the control room stood up, hand over heart, completely silent. Then Steve did something he had never done on air. He opened up, really opened up. "I've been struggling," he said, his voice shaking, privately, wondering if any of this even matters. All the shows, all the laughs, all the fame. But today, I know it does. Because today, God reminded me He's not done with me yet. No one applauded. Not yet. It wasn't the time. It was too real, too raw. What was happening wasn't entertainment. It was transformation. A room full of strangers turned into a circle of people, connected by something bigger than themselves. Faith had stepped into the spotlight, not planned, not rehearsed, just real. And it changed everything. This was no longer about Family Feud. This was about faith. About someone being brave enough to talk about Jesus when the cameras were live. About another man being humble enough to break in front of millions. And about a God who shows up in the places we least expect. The taping had ended, but no one moved. No music played. No credits rolled. The lights stayed warm and still, as if the studio itself was holding its breath. Jonathan and Steve stood quietly in the center, surrounded by silence that felt almost sacred. They hugged, no words, just a long, honest embrace between two men who knew they had just shared something far bigger than television. Around them, crew members stood frozen, some wiping tears, others just staring. One of them finally whispered what everyone was thinking. That wasn't a show. That was a move of God. Steve didn't speak much after that. He sat in his dressing room for a long time, staring at the mirror. Then he pulled out a notebook and wrote 7 simple words. That day changed everything for me. And it had. He started doing something new after that moment, something small, but real. Every show, before stepping onto set, he prayed out loud, not just for ratings or laughs, but for purpose. For God to use him. He began opening up more in interviews too, not just about success or comedy, but about faith, real faith. The kind that doesn't care about image. The kind that whispers in quiet rooms and speaks louder than any camera could. Jonathan's life changed too. Not in fame, but in reach. Letters poured in. People wrote saying how his honesty made them cry, made them think, made them pray. Churches started showing clips from that Family Feud episode during their sermons. Pastors quoted his words, "I didn't try to preach, just told the truth." And across the country, something stirred. People who hadn't prayed in years found themselves on their knees. Others said they'd been pretending, going through the motions, but that moment brought them back to God. Social media filled with one repeated phrase, "I felt God through my screen." Then came the testimonies. "I gave my life to Jesus." While watching that episode, that one moment brought me back after 10 years away from church. It wasn't hype. It wasn't production. It was real. And through it all, Jonathan remained steady. In one clip that kept going viral, he looked into the camera and said, "You don't have to be famous to be used by God. You just have to be willing." That sentence kept getting shared, written on posters, printed on church walls. Because it wasn't a line, it was a truth. Steve later sat in front of the camera for a follow-up segment. He looked tired but peaceful. "If you're struggling," he said softly, "if you've been pretending, or feel far from God, I hope this moment reminds you, He's never far from you." The screen faded slowly to black, but before the clip ended, a simple voiceover played, calm and steady. Sometimes the most extraordinary moments happen in the most unexpected places. And when we allow our hearts to be open, God moves. And just like that, a game show became a turning point, not just for 2 men on stage, but for thousands watching, searching, hoping for something real.